Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, depending on where you are in this world. This is Gloria White coming to you from Utah, USA. God bless you. Today we're continuing in the Second Maccabees, the book of Second Maccabees, which I'm reading from the New Jerusalem Bible, and we are in the second section of the Second Maccabees, and this is the compiler's preface. The story of Judas Maccabeus and his brothers, the purification of the great temple, the dedication of the altar, together with the wars of Antioch Epiphanes and his son Eupator, and the celestial manifestations that came to hearten the brave champions of Judaism, so that, few though they were, they pillaged the whole country, routed the barbarian hordes, recovered the sanctuary renowned the world over, the whole world over, liberated the city and re-established the laws by then all but abolished, the Lord showing his favor by all his gracious help to them. All this, already related in 5 books of Jason of Cyrene, we shall attempt to condense into a single work, considering the spate of figures and the difficulty encountered, because of the mass of material, by those who wish to immerse themselves in historical records. We have aimed at providing diversion for those who merely want something to read, saving of labor for those who enjoy committing things to memory, and profit for each and all. For us who have undertaken the drudgery of this abridgment, it has been it has been no easy task, but a matter of sweat and midnight oil, comparable to the exacting task of someone organizing a banquet, whose aim is to satisfy a variety of taste. Nevertheless, for the sake of rendering a general service, we remain glad to endure this drudgery, leaving accuracy of detail to the historian and concentrating our effort on tracing the outlines in this condensed version, just as the architect of a new house is responsible for the construction as a whole, while the man undertaking the ceramic painting has to take into consideration only the decorative requirements. So I think it is with us. To make the subject his own, to explore its byways, to be meticulous about details, is the business of the original historian, but the person making the adaptation must be allowed to aim at conciseness of expression and to forego any exhaustive treatment of his subject. So now let us begin our narrative without adding any more to what has been said above. There would be no sense in expanding the preface to the history and curtailing the history itself. Section 3. The story of Heliodorus. The arrival of Heliodorus in Jerusalem. While the holy city was inhabited in all peace and the laws were observed as perfectly as possible, owing to the piety of Onias the high priest and his hatred of wickedness, it came about that the kings themselves honored the holy place and enhanced the glory of the temple with the most splendid offerings, even to the extent that Seleucus, king of Asia, defrayed from his own revenues all the expenses arising out of sacrificial liturgy. But a certain Simon of the tribe of Bilgal, on being appointed administrator of the temple, came into conflict with the high priest over the regulation of the city markets. Unable to get the better of Onias, he went off to Apollonius, son of Thrascios, who was at that time commander-in-chief of Coele and Phoenicia, and made out to him that the treasury in Jerusalem was groaning with untold wealth, that the amount contributed was incalculable and out of all proportion to expenditure on the sacrifice, but that it could all be brought under the control of the king. Apollonius met the king and told him about the wealth that had been disclosed to him, whereupon the king selected Heliodorus, his chancellor, and sent him with instructions to effect the removal of the reported wealth. Heliodorus lost no time in setting out, ostensibly to inspect the towns of Cloe and Phoenicia, but in fact to accomplish the king's purpose. On his arrival in Jerusalem, and after a hospitable reception from the high priest and the city, he announced what had been disclosed, thus revealing the reason for his presence, and asked if it was indeed the true situation. The high priest explained that there were funds set aside for widows and orphans, with some belonging to Hyrcanus, son of Tobias, a man occupying a very exalted position, and that the whole sum, in contrast to what the evil Simon had alleged, amounted to 400 talents of silver and 200 of gold. He also added that it was entirely out of the question that an injustice should be done to those who had put their trust in the sanctity of the place and in the inviolable majesty of a temple venerated throughout the entire world. Consternation in Jerusalem. But Heliodorus, because of his instructions from the king, peremptorily insisted that the funds must be confiscated for the royal exchequer. Fixing a day for the purpose, he went in to draw up an inventory of the funds. There was no little consternation throughout the city. The priests in their sacred vestments prostrated themselves before the altar and prayed to heaven, to the author of the law governing deposits, to preserve these funds intact for the depositors. The appearance of the high priest was enough to pierce the heart of the beholder, his expression and his altered color betraying the anguish of his soul. The man was so overwhelmed by fear and bodily trembling that those who saw him could not possibly mistake the distress he was suffering. People rushed headlong from the houses, intent on making public supplication because of the indignity threatening the holy place. Women thronged the streets, swathed in sackcloth below their breasts. Girls, secluded indoors, came running, some to the doorways, some to the city walls, while others leaned out of the windows, all stretching out their hands to heaven in entreaty. It was pitiful to see the people crowding together to prostrate themselves, and the I'm sorry, I'm having trouble getting the light on the book so I can see the words. Okay, let's see. It was pitiful to see the people crowding together to prostrate themselves, and the foreboding of the high priest in his deep anguish, while they were calling on the all-powerful Lord to preserve the deposits intact for the depositors in full security. Heliodorus set about his appointed task. The punishment of Heliodorus. He had already arrived with his bodyguard near the treasury, when the sovereign of spirits and of every power caused so great an apparition that all who had dared to accompany Heliodorus were dumbfounded at the power of God and reduced to abject terror. Before their eyes appeared a horse, richly caparisoned and carrying a fearsome rider. Rearing violently, it struck at Heliodorus with its forefeet. The rider was seen to accoutred entirely in gold. Two other young men of outstanding strength and radiant beauty, magnificently apparelled, appeared to him at the same time, and taking their stand on each side of him, flogged him unremittedly, inflicting stroke after stroke. Suddenly Heliodorus fell to the ground, enveloped in thick darkness. His men came to rescue and placed him in a litter. This man, who but a moment before had made his way into the treasury, as we said above, with a great retinue and his whole bodyguard, and as they carried him away, powerless to help himself, they openly acknowledged the sovereign power of God. While Heliodorus lay prostrate under the divine visitation, speechless and bereft of all hope of deliverance, the Jews blessed the Lord who had miraculously glorified his own holy place, and the temple, which a little while before had been filled with terror and commotion, now overflowed with joy and gladness at the manifestation of the Almighty Lord. Some of Heliodorus' companions quickly begged Onias to entreat the Most High to grant the man his life, lying as he did at the very point of death. The high priest, afraid that the king might suspect the Jews of some foul play concerning Heliodorus, did indeed offer a sacrifice for the man's recovery. And while the high priest was performing the rite of expiation, the same young men again appeared to Heliodorus, wearing the same apparel, and standing beside him said, "Be very grateful to Onias the high priest, since it is for your sake that the Lord has granted you your life. As for you, you have been scourged by heaven. You must proclaim to everyone the grandeur of God's power." So saying, they vanished. The conversion of Heliodorus. Heliodorus offered sacrifice to the Lord and made most solemn vows to the preserver of his life, and then took courteous leave of Onias and marched his forces back to the king. He openly testified to everyone about the works of the supreme God, which he had seen with his own eyes. When the king asked Heliodorus what sort of man would be the right person to send to Jerusalem on a second occasion, he replied, "If you have some enemy or anyone disloyal to the state, send him there, and you will get him back well flogged, if he survives at all, since some particularly divine power attaches to the holy place. He who has his dwelling in heaven watches over the place and defends it, and he strikes down and destroys those who come to harm it. This was the outcome of the affair of Heliodorus and the preservation of the treasury. How cool is that? Oh man, our God is so good. Wow. That was pretty amazing, huh? And as always, I love you.